Good evening, and welcome to this new edition of Conversations with Lothrop. I'm Richard Lothrop, and I'll be your host for a few minutes here, roughly half an hour or so, while we interview another distinguished guest. You might be interested to know that this is the 40th of these programs we have done, which does not seem possible, but it's been very enjoyable, and we certainly appreciate the support that our listeners have given us. Our guest today is Gary Boyle. And Gary, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Gary is Oberlin's Director of Planning and Zoning. He began his work here on May 4th of this year, coming to us from Sandusky, where he was Chief Planner. There were, and I think this is interesting, there were 80 applicants for the position. 6 finalists, and this gentleman here emerged as the winner, and I guess we hope that's the right term for the job. He is a native of Canada. He has been a professional planner for 25 years. In the past, he has served 3 different cities in Ontario. He has a bachelor's degree at urban studies and is winding down a master's degree in planning. Is that, you're still winding it down?
I'm still winding that.
Yes. How far away are you for that?
One course.
One course. Oh,
away.
my, that's
so
coming close.
The end's in sight.
One question I would like to ask is, how did you happen to migrate across the border?
Well, that's an interesting tale in and of itself, I guess. Several of my friends that played hockey with came down here to play hockey at Ohio University, and through various connections, they have since moved back to Ohio from the late 60s and early 70s when they were in school there. This opportunity came up in Sandusky in '88, and decided to apply for the job. My wife's parents were from the Pittsburgh area originally, so her uncle had taught at OU at the same time some of my friends were down there, so we had some real affinity to Ohio, and this opportunity came up, and it seemed like an interesting one for me and the family, and we made the move.
Right.
And we're happy we did.
Yes, and we're certainly happy that you did. Are you a graduate of Ohio University?
No.
No.
I'm not.
Okay. Let's start off with a definition of planning. What do you mean by planning in the city context?
Well, I guess planning in the city context is maybe not too dissimilar to what we do every day in our lives as we plan on what we're going to do that day. I think what we do as far as municipal planning goes is we attempt to identify things that need to be accomplished, goals or objectives that we need to reach. In turn, there are various strategies to reach some of those goals, and I think we try to define those and test them a little and determine which one might be the appropriate one. We try to implement that technique, see how it works, continue to test it and monitor it, and from the point of view of seeing whether it does meet what we hoped it would meet. So I think it's a bit of a cyclical process. We try to identify a problem, some options to address the problem, choose one of those options, implement it, and check our progress in reaching that goal that we've set out to attain. So in a nutshell, I guess that's the planning process.
And it would be safe to say that one size does not fit all.
Well,
each city has its individualistic aspects, so that something that might be appropriate in Sandusky might not be here. Is that safe to say? Or
well, I think that's true. I think every community is unique in and of itself, and I think we really need to look at the community, what its needs truly are, what it identifies as its needs and goals and objectives, and then work towards those. So although there are some common techniques and a lot of things that a lot of cities do similarly, I think for a planning program to be successful, it really needs to be tailored to the community it's in.
Mm-hmm. What led you into the field in the first place? How did you get interested in planning?
How did I get interested in planning? Well, I guess I go back to my youth, I guess, and as a young guy growing up in a town of about 45,000, it fairly compact city. I think probably any neighborhood was 20 or 30-minute walk to downtown. It for years was the same size. Well, but the late 50s, early 60s, things started to change with some suburbanization and friends moving out, the neighborhood changing, corner stores disappearing, strip malls appearing, though. The Saturday afternoon trek downtown to a movie was replaced with your parents driving you to a mall someplace to see a movie. It was just a lot of things were changing, and even as a young teenager, wondered why those things were happening. That kind of always fascinated me. That, along with the fact, I guess I was pretty fortunate. My parents traveled a lot, so I did get an opportunity to see a lot of cities, large and small. And I guess as a high school student, I was even more curious as to why communities ended up being the way they are. And I think that kind of naturally led into my university studies in geography and urban studies, because I think history and geography are some of the major factors, if we can call it, in community development, and why certain communities are the way they are and others are the way they are. So I guess it was just out of that natural curiosity as a kid, why are communities the way they are? Once I got into the study program, I thought, well, yeah, city planning or planning in general and understanding the geography of an area and spatial relationships really seemed to make sense to me, and I guess I've been stuck with it.
Stuck with it ever since. What was there about the Oberlin job that attracted you? What was there that led to your application?
Well, I think I was in Sandusky for 9 years, and as its chief planner and director of planning, and chief cook and bottle washer, it seemed at times, and it was able to accomplish 3 large planning projects, up to including a comprehensive plan, which was just being completed when this job was advertised. And I felt I had accomplished a number of things I had set out to do in Sandusky. This job came up fairly close by. I had some familiarity with Oberlin. I always was impressed by the community as an outsider, its architectural character, the college, just the sense that you had visiting the community, as well as, I guess, input from others that knew the community as being a progressive one. I think when this opportunity came up, I saw it as a chance to pursue my planning career, be involved in a team approach to city and community building that I think we have with the city administration and council. So I saw it as an opportunity, I thought, to get involved in a community and increase my knowledge as well. So I saw it as a real opportunity for me. I feel grateful that I have been given the opportunity to work here now and get to know the community
You're
better.
enjoying it?
Yes, I am.
Good,
yes.
good. It's maybe I shouldn't ask if it's what you'd hoped it would be, because it takes time to evolve, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and and I'm still learning about the community and trying to develop a better sense as to what its needs are. So, I think that's part of the challenge, though, that I think if we're in a position too long, we tend to get a little complacent, and I just sought new desires and challenges, I think, is the best way to describe it.
We've touched on it a little bit, but what actually does a director of planning and zoning in Oberlin do? Just sort of, can you kind of capsule that for us?
Well, I guess because it's a smaller city and a smaller administrative staff, I guess do a little bit of everything, which is fine too, because I think variety is important. Probably the principal role or responsibility is to try and develop some long-range planning documents for the city, a comprehensive plan, and in turn to update our zoning code and maps so that we can implement whatever our long-range community development goals are going to be. Related to that, I guess, is answering any number of development inquiries. We do have developers that are regularly checking with the city about development potential on property, so it's answering those kind of inquiries. It's working with property owners or developers in formalizing their plans, making sure they meet what our requirements are. So there's that sort of plan review and assisting individual property owners or developers in making sure that the plans they bring forward for review do address the kinds of things we as a community want to see.
And you work closely with the Economic Development Director.
Work very closely with Bob Jacomowitz. On a daily basis, we're together discussing approaches to different issues that are facing the city and how we can collaboratively work together to try and make things happen that are going to be acceptable to the community and help us in the long run.
He is, by the way, an alumnus of this program.
Yes, he is. He told me about that.
And he's still smiling. So.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Are there some basic planning challenges that are unique to Oberlin?
Well, I think there probably are some unique ones because they are unique to Oberlin, and I guess and there's some general planning challenges I guess that face just about every community. I mean, downtown revitalization is always an important one in every community because the downtown really is the heart and soul, and it really truly reflects sort of the state of the city. And so that's an important issue. I think housing conditions are important, housing rehabilitation programs and home ownership programs, encouraging that. Those are important things from the point of view of neighborhood stability and encouraging investment in neighborhoods and people being stakeholders in their community. One of the more unique challenges, I think, with Oberlin and opportunities, and that's always a double-sided coin, yes. I feel, is Oberlin College's presence. And I think the opportunity that we have to work with them to make sure their long-range campus planning goals fit as well as they can with our goals to ensure that we have stable neighborhoods and a downtown that prospers. I think that's a real challenge for us to make sure that we can partner with them so that everyone benefits in the long run.
And the college right now is doing some strategic planning, is it not?
It's been our understanding that they have done some planning. I think they intend to do more. The city manager, Rob DeSpirito, has offered our services and availability to the college to work with them so that whatever plans they do eventually develop certainly will dovetail with things that we're comfortable with. So that is probably a unique aspect that many towns might not face of a similar size.
And that sort of comes into the next question I was going to ask. What determines what is good planning for a city, any given city? You partly answered that.
Well, yeah, I think part of it is embarking, I think, partly on a comprehensive planning program where we can really look at what our land use needs are, what our community development goals are. And I think the only way to effectively achieve that is through the public participation process. We need to have informational meetings. We need to have different forums to gather public input, and there's many different techniques that can be used to do that. But the key is to involve the public right at the outset, involve major players in the community, such as a college or businesses, the hospitals, things of that nature, the school district, to involve everyone that has a stake in the community so that we truly develop a plan that's reflective of what the public would like to see the city be in the future. I think that's the key, is a strong public involvement process.
We've gone through some of that, and I think the last time was about 5 years ago, perhaps. And one of the things that I think tends to happen is that the efforts go on a shelf somewhere. So isn't there sort of a challenge to see that it doesn't stay on the shelf?
It is, and I think what we need to do as we do embark on this comprehensive planning process is identify to people where we want it to go in the end. It's just not an exercise to develop a plan. So many communities have developed plans and then tend to ignore them. I think we want to develop a plan that It's going to meet our needs. It's going to be a dynamic document. We're not just going to put it aside. We're going to use it in decision making. It's going to assist the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board and the Historic Preservation Commission and all our other boards and commissions, and assist council in its deliberations, because as you know, it's far from an easy task making land use decisions. But if we have a plan that there has been good public input on and buy-in into it, then I think in the long run it helps us all attempting to implement that plan through zoning changes or development proposals or your budgeting process as we decide where we need infrastructure improvements. So I think with that public input, we can develop a plan that hopefully will be better and one that won't just be placed on a shelf and ignored.
Good. Now in Oberlin you have a large number of people who are very much for one kind of a plan or another. There are a goodly number who really don't care one way or the other. And there are people, often the silent group, who only become energized if something suddenly is proposed they don't like, who really don't want Oberlin to change at all. You have these three sort of groups. How do you reconcile those as a planner looking? Each of these has legitimate concerns and feelings.
I think and that's probably the planner's dilemma, and a lot of times a community's dilemma.
It wouldn't just be Oberlin either, of
and
course.
It's not unique to Oberlin at all. I think what we need to do, and hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, the comprehensive planning process provides that forum to bring people together and exchange information and exchange ideas and hear thoughts on various things. I think we're never going to be a no-growth community. I think that's unrealistic to expect that growth or change is not going to occur. Cities are dynamic organisms. They have to change. They have to evolve. If they don't, they're going to stagnate, die, and become ghost towns. So I think it's the question of how we handle change and growth and how that fits into whatever long-range planning program we develop is the key. So hopefully that various perspectives can be considered and addressed, and obviously there will be some places where development might not be appropriate for environmental reasons or other reasons. There'll be some areas where it is appropriate, and I think the challenge is to develop a plan that's going to identify where growth can reasonably occur, how we can best protect neighborhoods in downtown, and balance all those competing forces. And it's no easy task, and it's something that both the administration, not just myself, but the administration and council will have to deal with and come to some kind of conclusion based on hopefully some consensus in the community as we go through this process. And I guess I hope that's where it will take us, that we'll be able to identify what direction most of us can live with.
Next question really has several parts. Let's do one part and then we'll take a quick break, and then we're getting right to that time, believe it or not. And then we'll tackle the last two. There are really three divisions, aren't there, of planning. One would be residential, commercial, industrial. Now, that may be oversimplification, but that's, I think, how people on council and the public in general see it. Let's take residential first. What space do we have? Are there spaces left?
Well, Oberlin does have some open areas left where development is possible. I think there's some room in the northwest part of the city, north of 511 and east of Pyle Amherst, that it may provide some opportunities for future residential development, and that was identified back in the 91 strategic plan. There's a fairly large, potentially developable area that we've called the Southwest Quadrant, that's west of State Route 58 and south of Hamilton. So there's a fairly large area that potentially could be developed in that area for new residential development. And of course there's isolated smaller parcels, but they're probably the larger areas. Other places for residential development, there's some opportunity, I think, for infill development or residential development occurring in established neighborhoods, possibly on vacant lots, I think that the key in those cases is to make sure that it occurs in a manner that blends in well with its setting. A third option for residential development is possibly loft or third floor, second floor apartments in the downtown area over some of the buildings that maybe are underutilized. I think residential development in the downtown area is a planning technique that's been used in other communities, larger and smaller. It increases foot traffic. There's a sort of round-the-clock presence in the area then, and of course we have that to a degree now, but I think that possibility exists, that we could possibly have more residential in and around the downtown area. So I think there are areas where we can grow. There are areas where we can expand into, and hopefully that development will occur in a manner that that is consistent with the goals that we identify through this planning process.
Most of the people most of the time. How about
well, if we can do that, we'll have achieved quite a bit.
Yes.
We will have achieved quite a bit if we can do that.
Yeah, let me tie into something before we take our break, because you said something I don't want to lose the thread of. You're talking about putting housing perhaps in existing areas. And this brings up a fairly new concept to us, and that's the so-called PD, planned development. Could you define that term? And then I have one other question related to it.
Well, the planned development regulations, it's a zoning district that was introduced into the zoning code fairly recently. And I think the intent of that was to recognize that in some instances the code's present regulations may be a little too rigid given the situation on a given property. So we've had several PD zoning districts placed on in the last several years. I think the most recent one would be the Oberlin Commons subdivision, which is a single-family subdivision, and one might not think that that's where you'd have this designation placed, but what it did was allow the developer to develop, narrower streets, a grid street pattern with smaller setbacks than what we might see in some conventional subdivisions, and in turn to try and blend it in with the neighborhood that it was in, but more to replicate sort of the traditional neighborhood development style. So it certainly has its place. I think in other instances we may find infill properties or these vacant lots where a single-family home might be appropriate on it, given its size and given what's around it. And in those cases, the present zoning is going to allow that to happen. In other cases, we may have a property owner that wants to develop something beyond the normal zoning. In other words, they might want to do some multifamily. They might not want to do two-family. They might want to do 3, 4, 5, 6, depending on the size of the property. I think the key in those cases is to make sure that any development that it's going to be there isn't at a density that's going to create problems for the neighborhood, that sort of the site amenities are available, like off-street parking, that there's adequate setbacks, that we can reasonably service it, and it's going to be harmonious in nature with what's around it, both architecturally and maybe density-wise, I think. And those are some very difficult things to balance. I think what's missing, though, in our planned development regulations, and part of that comes back to the need for a comprehensive plan, is I think we need some locational criteria where it's best to apply this planned development district zoning. What sort of locations should they be on arterial streets? Should they be near public open space? What densities are reasonable to allow? Those kinds of things I think we need to develop in a policy format that will help the decision makers, planning commission and city council in their deliberations.
And they're obviously easier. As a concept, it would be easier to do in, say, that northwest development that you spoke of than it would be to, say, try to plant it on an existing street with.
And depending on the nature of it, if it's say a multifamily project and it's near other multifamily, it might work. But if it's surrounded by owner-occupied single-family homes, I think we can reasonably expect some opposition to that sort of changing character in a neighborhood. And so we really need to be sensitive to those things.
So it's a tool that's good, but we need to use it carefully.
Judiciously, yes.
Okay. Let's take our break, and we'll be back in about a minute and a half or so and continue with this interview.
No sooner does something happen than the TV.
Yes.
Not rambling too.
There before almost anyone else. Almost. Please support the American Red Cross. The need is real. The time is now. Help can't wait.
Welcome back with our guest, Gary Boyle. And I think in a moment the phone number for the studio is going to be scrolled there if you would like to call in and ask any questions or make any comments to our guest. In the meantime, we were talking about residential. And there was one thing there I didn't want to lose track of, and that's the whole question of annexation. How does that enter our planning equation?
I think annexations a lot of times are difficult processes for a lot of people. I think the city's approach historically has been to react to petitions as they're filed by individual or collectively by property owners. And I think there's some merit to that, because then we're dealing with a property owner initiated activity. Obviously, our corporate boundaries they meander all over the place, and reflecting historically the development of the community and petitions to annex in the past. I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of look just beyond our corporate boundaries to see what kind of development might occur, to make sure it's compatible with what we want to see happen within our corporate limits, and also to recognize the fact that many times property ownership does cross political boundaries, and in some instances property owners will want to annex in. I think we're looking at the southwest quadrant right now. It's a fairly large area. Parts of 2 townships are involved, as well as much land that's in the city. I think in order to properly plan for that whole area, we need to look beyond just our corporate boundaries to see how future streets or open space in that area may tie in. So I think it's important for us in certain instances to look beyond our boundaries to see how development could potentially occur in the future, how we might service it, and to make sure that it fits in with what our goals are for the rest of our community. So I don't know whether I've kind of obliquely answered that question.
Are there ways that we could encourage it, or should we encourage annexation, or should we continue basically what we've done?
I think our present policy seems to have worked, and I guess that's all based on a fairly short tenure here. I think by offering services to property owners that maybe townships aren't in a position to, I guess we sometimes offer that kind of encouragement indirectly, even though it might not be an overt activity on our part, but a lot of times development, especially beyond large lot, 1.5 to 2 acre development, is going to need sanitary sewers, and we have the ability to provide that kind of utility service. And I think for that reason, property owners may find it desirable to annex into the city. I think there's other opportunities to work with townships too on joint economic development districts and things of that nature, where we can all enjoy the benefits and hopefully none of the downsides of development. So I think there's lots of opportunities.
Then the second, we've done the residential, touched on that. The next one is commercial, and I guess I have 2 things I'd like to ask about that. Are there areas that you see in Oberlin that might be utilized for additional commercial development?
Well, I think that the 1991 strategic plan identified a commercial nodal area at the intersection of State Road 58 and US 20. And I think that still makes some sense, that we may see some additional commercial development in and around that area. Also out 511, I think, heading east, there's possibly there's some possibility there for maybe some commercial development closer to the highway interchanges. Again, that's area that, you know, partly in and partly out of the city, but probably lends itself in the long run to some commercial development. I think we'll probably see other commercial development occurring in and around the downtown. I think downtown will continue to have an important place in the business hierarchy, and, you know, we want to promote and encourage that to happen. But, you know, we're entertaining some other development proposals right now that would result in some additional commercial or business development fairly close to downtown. And I think you're bound to see that happen on the major roads, particularly 58.
You did touch, I think, also on what I was going to ask her, that you do see the potential for mixing residential and commercial, particularly downtown.
I think there's an opportunity.
Interesting concept. And there's some of that now, of course.
There is some now.
But
and
it sort of just happened. I don't think it's ever been planned.
Yeah, it may not have been, you know, openly encouraged, but I think, you know, our zoning code right now does encourage that kind of mixed-use development in our central business district. And, you know, I think we should be open to considering that type of development when it's in a context that's appropriate. And I think that's the key, is to make that determination. Is it appropriate in this instance, in this case, in this setting? So there's a lot of different ways we can sort of arrive at those conclusions, and one of them is public input.
And in Oberlin, you get it. They're not bashful. Let's talk about the third one, which is industrial. And basically, our industrial park is just about filled.
Yes.
Do you see areas that we might utilize for industry, and if so, new industry, and if so, what kind of industry would you foresee us attracting?
Yeah,
or wanting to attract?
Those are all good questions. With respect to the industrial park, there's only an acre or so left.
No.
I think the community should rightfully be proud of that industrial park. That's one of the things that really impressed me before I came here for my interview, as I looked a little more closely at town, was the quality of the development that had occurred in there. I think it's a first-rate industrial park. If we could replicate something like that, I know Bob Giacomowitz would love to be able to do that again. And I think we need to, from the point of view of making sure we have a diversified tax base, because that helps the residential ratepayers in the long run. As far as future industrial areas go, again, the strategic plan identified some areas along the Route 20 corridor, which I think still makes sense from an access point of view to the highway system. More recently, we started to entertain things in the southeast quadrant, and now what we normally refer to the southeast quadrant, now I'm talking south of Hamilton and east of 58, where there's, I think, some potential for some mixed commercial or industrial development in that overall area, as well as possibly some residential as well. So I think there's some opportunities out there. The key will be, how can we plan for its reasonable development, and how can we service it?
And that leads into one other comment that we need to mention, and that is that all of this has implications for infrastructure, or sewer, or water, or electricity,
it does.
Streets, all the city services, of course.
All the city services are impacted by development, and I think that's why we need to be careful in our planning program that we ensure that adequate services are available before new development comes on stream. So that becomes an important process for the administration and council to undertake, to make sure that adequate services are available. I know Mike Sigg, our Public Works Director, it's of concern to him that we have, you know, adequate water and sanitary sewer capacities. And those are the kinds of things that we really need to plan for. The land use planning, or developing a plan, as you mentioned earlier, for the sake of developing a plan doesn't do any good unless we can service areas and allow development to happen in a manner that we think we can reasonably service and sustain over the long term.
Now let me ask you a question about zoning. Do you see our designations now and our regulations within those designations needing to be looked at along with the strategic plan?
I think part of my familiarization with our present program is, of course, has been reviewing and working with the zoning code for the past 5 months, and that's been interesting in and of itself. It's an older document. It's been amended on a couple of occasions, and fairly recently there were some new regulations introduced. I think, though, we really need to look at introducing some new zoning district categories. And you mentioned industrial development. Sort of, right now we have a light industrial zoning district, and Bob Jacomowitz and I have talked about the need for developing maybe a research industrial park, very light, high-tech type of zoning, to avoid concerns, I guess, that have been historically raised about the type of future industrial
We've had problems with
development
noise
that would
truck
address
traffic
those
and
kinds of
that
things.
kind
So
of
I
thing.
think that type of new hybrid category for industrial research, I think, is worthy of further examination. Multifamily residential zoning. We don't have any right now. It's happened either through recently the planned development process or on an ad hoc basis. And I don't think that's in our long-term interest to keep doing that. I think we need to identify what areas are appropriate for multiple family development and then zone those areas. Another major area we need to look at, I think, is with respect to the college and the hospital and schools and other uses that now are in residential zoning districts. And I think it would be appropriate for us to develop an institutional zoning category. Almost every community has that zoning district, so we can, so the public's aware of where these kinds of uses are likely to occur. And I think that's the whole basis for zoning. It's an identifier of where types of development can occur, and in turn is a vehicle that we can use to protect neighborhoods from encroachment of uses that maybe aren't desirable. So I think those are probably 3 major districts. I think we also need to go back and revisit some of our residential districts, because some of our single-family dwelling districts do allow 2-family use, and I think we really need to sort some of that out and more clearly
That gets
identify
into something-
truly what we want to see.
And that also gets into something we don't have time to get into tonight. We could take a whole program on, and that's the rooming house
And that's
conflict
part of
those
the issue
kinds
that
of things.
we also are examining.
One big final question. You've been here now 5 months. Do you have now in your mind what you'd like Oberlin to be like planning-wise, say 5 years from now, 10 years from now? We could jump 1 decade. What would you like to see?
If we could jump a decade, I would hope that our planning efforts that we're about to embark on have been successful, that the community has seen things happen in a manner that they were agreeable to at the time of development of the comprehensive plan. I guess I'd hope to see our efforts in our downtown marketing study that Bob was directly involved with come to
Downtown,
fruition,
Main Street
so that
downtown, yes.
downtown continues to be a vital place to the community and businesses thrive there. I would hope that. I would hope that the college, and I have every reason to believe that it will continue to be an important force in the community, and that it will continue its academic leadership and draw students from such a wide variety of places. And I would hope that our exercise in planning with them would have been successful from both our perspectives, the cities and the colleges. I'd hope that we'd have some new industrial park area that had come on stream and provided an opportunity for jobs in the communities and investment. I would hope that existing businesses are still flourishing, and that our ongoing housing programs, our rehab program, continues to make inroads into neighborhoods that need new investment, and that our home ownership programs and CRA activities with local banks, that bears fruit as well, and that we have greater home ownership, because I think that's the key to stable neighborhoods in the long run. So I guess if I had a wish list, those would be the kinds of things that I hope the community would benefit from in the long run.
Is there any population goal you would see for 10 years? Is there a point beyond which we shouldn't grow, do you think, without losing the uniqueness of the
Well, I think
community?
and that's that's something I think where we do have areas for new development. Some of them are somewhat removed, such as the southwest quadrant, from existing neighborhoods, and makes it a little easier to do that kind of development there. We haven't done any population forecasting or projecting. That's an inexact science. It depends on so many assumptions. I would hope that, though, that the quality of life and the character of the community is not adversely impacted by what we do in the next 10 years.
We certainly will hope that that will happen, and I have a feeling it may. Well, we'll think positively on that. Believe it or not, we've come to the end of this interview. It goes fast, doesn't it? Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share?
No, I think just that, welcome this opportunity to be on your show and talk about planning in general rather than specifics on rezonings that may be contentious. I think it's important for us to get information out to the community about planning and what we hope to achieve in the long run, especially as we now start to gear up to do some comprehensive planning. So, this has been a great opportunity, and I appreciate that. And I think, as I've noticed with the entire city administration, our doors are always open. If people have questions or have information to share with us or points of view, we're certainly available there to entertain them.
Bob, Gary, we certainly thank you so much for coming on the show tonight
My
and
pleasure.
sharing all of these
My
thoughts.
pleasure.
And we do have a gift for you here. You get one of the Conversations with Lothrop mugs.
Well, thank you.
And think of us on the program when you drink your coffee out of that.
I shall.
And we thank you again so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening, and we'll hope to be back in a month with another interesting guest on Conversations with Lothrop. This is Richard Lothrop saying thank you very much for being with us, and good night. We've done it.
All right.